Hi everybody and welcome to Claudio, the Chancellor of Security. My name is Sascha Bharath. I'm a computer science student at the University of Warwick, but I'm currently on placement with Burberry in the network and infrastructure team. Now, a natural starting place when talking about the cloud would be to introduce it. Many different sources have their own definitions of a cloud, but when we look at all of these, 5 key characteristics, which were quite succinctly identified by NIST, seem to present themselves. And this can be used to understand the cloud. First amongst these would be on-demand self-service. Users can provision resources, whether that be compute, storage, etc., whenever they need, automatically without having to liaise with the cloud service provider or CSP team of humans directly. Secondly, we have elasticity. Resources are required and freed as demand varies for the user. Therefore, you can dynamically assign more resources in periods of high demand and release them once you finish using them. Thirdly, we have broad network access. Cloud services can be accessible by clients from pretty much anywhere globally, as long as you have a stable internet connection. We have resource pooling, where CSPs ensure that there's a supply of available resources, which they manage on behalf of and allocate to the customers. So the user doesn't really need to concern themselves with the location or maintenance of the servers. And lastly, we have measured service. Utilization of the resources are carefully monitored and controlled to ensure the most efficient usage of them, and so that users will only be charged precisely what they use. Now, embedded into the notion of the cloud is the handover of work and responsibility to the CSP. We, the consumer, rely on the service to be provided to us. There are 3 common service models to do this. Firstly, we have SaaS, or software as a solution. Consumers can simply connect to and use cloud-based software, whilst responsibility for the hosting maintenance still falls upon the CSP. Our common examples of this would be Office 365, which we all know and love, and Dropbox. Secondly, we have PaaS, or Platform as a Service, where consumers can use the service structure, which is essentially just a complete dev environment provided by the CSP to produce, deliver, and run your own applications. Again, we have AWS Elastic Beanstalk or Google App Engine as common examples. And thirdly, we have IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service. Consumers manage all aspects of the service except for the physical hardware itself. So virtual machine management, OS configuration, and any apps running above OS level would all fall on the user. Our common examples of this would be AWS Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2, and Microsoft Azure. And we have XaaS, or Anything as a Service, which is essentially the catch-all phrase that we use to represent the family of technology solutions now moving to the cloud. Now, there are also several ways the cloud infrastructure itself can be constructed, which we refer to as the cloud deployment models. Firstly, we have private cloud, which is where the organization deploys their own internal solution, and resources are completely controlled by the organization itself, which will provide its own data centers and virtualization capabilities to offer cloud services. This is often adopted for high security or regulatory compliance purposes. Second, we have public cloud. CSP offers cloud services to pretty much any customer through a subscription model. The resources are offered to a range of unrelated customers, and the CSP manages and allocates these according to availability and demand. And we also have hybrid cloud, which is a model constructed by a combination of other deployment models, which allows the organization to just reap the benefits of whichever ones it's using. So the natural question would be, why are businesses migrating to the cloud? There are several reasons for this. Firstly, flexibility. With the on-demand self-service capabilities, users can access the resources they need as they like, when they like. This leads to very fast resource procurement versus other environments where it could potentially take days or even weeks to get services, which just leads to better overall operational efficiency. Secondly, we have global reach. With broad network access and the global footprint of most CSPs now, services can be accessed from pretty much anywhere in the world. So even if you're located geographically far away from your customers, they can still access your services with low latency. And this can be enhanced even further with content delivery networks. Thirdly, we have ease of maintenance. With resource pooling, the CSPs ensure that there's a supply of resources which they allocate for you. So there's no need to manually allocate and deploy them, or even have to try and estimate your infrastructure capacity in advance. We have rapid deployment. With elasticity, your applications will be able to access resources in periods of high demand without delay, and you can release them instantaneously and stop billing for them. This helps to lower cost. With measured service, users will only be charged for exactly what they use, and they're not paying for resources once they're released. Alongside this, the aggregation of many different cloud customers allows public cloud providers to benefit from economies of scale, which results in the lower prices for your customers. And lastly, security. We can offload responsibility for security to the CSP to ensure that assets are protected and safe according to their standards. Therefore, with all these different services that cloud can provide and their adaptable different deployments, migrating from on-premise to the cloud offers many different advantages. So full-scale cloud migration would be the perfect solution for everyone, right? No, this definitely isn't the case. There's a lot of major security risks that emerge in the adoption of cloud computing. Let's just look at a couple cases of this. Firstly, we have Codespaces. Codespaces was a cloud-based development environment, or IaaS solution as mentioned earlier, which works alongside GitHub, which was flooded with a distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack. Cloudspaces contacted the attacker, and they kindly said that they'd stop if they paid a ransom, but how is it they're able to contact the attacker? Well, the attacker actually left their contact details in the EC2 control panel. The DDoS actually diverted the attention, whilst in reality, the AWS accounts had already been compromised, and when Codespaces tried to regain control, the attacker had again already created backup loggings in the EC2 panel to ensure that they had persistent access. Once they realized Codespaces didn't intend to pay the ransom, they just started to delete random artifacts. Second, we have the case of Microsoft and the US government. A hacking team, referred to as Storm 0558, breached an unidentified number of email accounts, including some associated with the US and various other Western European government agencies. The US government contacted Microsoft to alert them of the exploits they could find the vulnerability in the cloud service. The hackers had used forged authentication tokens to access email accounts with Outlook Web Access in Exchange Online and Outlook.com in May, remaining undetected for almost a month. And these are Amazon and Microsoft, which are two major players in the cloud industry. So, what exactly could go wrong? Several points. Firstly, issues with access control. Access control is essentially determining who's able to access, so see, use, modify, delete, the resources in question. Improper configuration can lead to vulnerabilities, and organizations often depend upon the CSP or some other reporting tool to pick up these inconsistencies. There's a high probability of this threat becoming an issue due to either just knowledge gaps or lack of transparency between the organization and any vendors they're interacting with. Secondly, network access. All of our cloud services are now network accessible. This is super convenient because they can be accessed via the internet. However, it also means we actually just created a globally accessible, 24/7 available attack vector for malicious actors to access your assets. Thirdly, we have division of responsibility of security. There's often a blurred line between who's responsible for securing what, which again inevitably leads to misunderstandings, and ultimately no one addresses the risk. With regards to data security, we entrust the CSP with our data, and we'll assume that they'll take the necessary actions to keep it safe. But what exact measures are they taking? Is your data encrypted? Are there secure backups in place? And again, with monitoring and threat detection, we do know that we have inbuilt monitoring, but is it comprehensive enough? We do have logs for admins to review, but this is a reactive rather than proactive preventative measure. And lastly, trusting the CSP. When we engage them, we do consider their reputation, their size, their brand visibility, but we often conflate these for security. Do you trust that your data won't be leaked or destroyed, and do you believe they can guarantee the services they're providing you? Because we saw in the case of Codespaces with Amazon, and the government with Microsoft, this wasn't the case. So if any of the affirmation does go awry, what actually does this mean? This could cause several issues for you. Firstly, reputational damage. It could do irreparable damage to your business reputation and trust with your stakeholders. If you consider it from your customer's perspective, if a company they hired had already demonstrated they were unprepared and couldn't protect the service or data that customers relied on them to, it'd be pretty unwise to trust that company again. Secondly, regulatory compliance. Discovering that the organization has failed to comply with regulations or industry standards, whether that be GDPR and Data Protection Act, or the ISO 27K standards, failure to comply could just lead to legal repercussions from governing bodies, as well as possibly fines. We have data loss, which would be problematic for pretty much any modern organization because they all depend on data. It could have a devastating effect on your customers if their data is lost or you can't provide them the services you promised, and you'll incur additional costs in data recovery. There'll be damage to the estate. Your cloud estate might require redesign or reconfiguration, or in an extreme case be rendered completely unusable and just require rebuilding if an attack causes serious damage to functionality. And lastly, difficulty in recovery. Time is needed for disaster recovery and to get services back online, but this can be challenging depending on the severity of the attack and the DR resources that you had at your disposal before. In cases, lateral movement might be possible for adversary if your cloud environment wasn't isolated properly or your containers weren't secured, which just means the damage will be even more widespread. So if we consider the benefits versus the risk, is cloud really the best solution? Is it really cost effective? When we take into account additional cost for further resources, whether that be monitoring tools or insurance, and also considering the potential costs of a cyber attack, whether that be fines, payouts, or maybe even court fees, this might not be the case. And again, is relinquishing control really the correct move? It's definitely easier, but remember that critical assets and services and sensitive data are now being passed over to the cloud service provider to look after. We have to make some trade-offs in order to have all of these advantages of the cloud. Don't worry, there's another option. Previously forsaken on-premise might actually be a better option in some cases. Why would this be? Well, first and foremost, keeping control. Previously, you've given up control to the CSP for flexibility and ease. This is understandable, but it's definitely not always the right decision. Critical data might be better kept on-prem, where you have complete control and visibility of what's stored, where, how it's being stored, for how long, and exactly who's accessing it. This also enables you to have the business to ensure and monitor regulatory compliance. They can adjust practices as and when they wish, and you have a refined security approach. You can deploy custom security measures for your organization. You can disconnect it from the internet or parts of the network, which can reduce the attack vectors, and you can apply encryption as you see fit. Secondly, we're removing ambiguity in the multi-cloud environments. Multi-cloud deployments are extremely useful, but they do lead to more complexity, and they require further resources to ensure correctness. It's difficult to protect data and enforce access control policies consistently across a multi-cloud architecture, which just means mistakes are more likely and it's more susceptible to attacks. Thirdly, it allows for smoother integration with legacy systems. Legacy systems don't integrate well with cloud, we all know this, but due to issues with performance and security, so staying or migrating to on-prem might be less convenient, but actually it's a more sensible solution in some cases to ensure continuity. So this leads us to the classic question, to cloud or not to cloud? Now, sometimes cloud really is useful and would be the most beneficial option for your use case, but it isn't the only option, certainly isn't always the best. So consider the following to help you decide. What kind of data and assets does your organization have, and what's the appropriate level of security for them? What regions do you operate in, and what's the associated regulations? When you're doing cost analysis, we always consider CapEx and OpEx, but we should also be considering the worst case scenario or any potential disaster recovery costs as a result of a cyber attack. What legacy systems do you support, and do you plan to continue supporting them? And often forsaken, but important, what are the future ventures of your organization, and what are the corresponding changes to your IT infrastructure as a result of this? If you're planning to take on more high security, government or military clients, security would be paramount. If you're planning to just increase the number, scale up and scale out options would be important. But of course, why not take a blended approach? Sometimes combining both on-premise and cloud infrastructure in your architecture to meet differing requirements could be a good option too. Now, depending on context, cloud, on-prem or hybrid can all present themselves as valid solutions. However, when adopting the cloud, it's essential to address the security risks that inevitably emerge with it. Firstly, we have IAM control. Having a robust IAM strategy for the cloud to ensure the correct access permissions of individuals and ensuring that appropriately restricted. So setting up carefully planned groups, roles, and users with the least privilege principle enforced. Secondly, it's important that we're actively monitoring resources. We know the CSP will monitor resources for billing purposes, but your business should be able to detect irregular resource usage or behavior as well, because this could signify early stages of an attack. Thirdly, we need to be deploying IDS. We ensure an appropriate cloud IDS solution is active to allow for threats to be detected, and also deploy network IDS, as this can help detect attempts spreading across the network that could eventually impact your cloud estate. And lastly, adopting a zero-trust cloud security model, where we just assume all users or services aren't trusted at all times, regardless of whether they're internal or external to the network, therefore enforcing strict authentication and authorization rules, which will lead to better overall security. Thank you very much for listening.